The trouble began before we'd even left the trailhead. My buddy Carl puffed his chest out like he was Daniel Boone reborn, insisting he could read the map better than any of us. None of us argued too hard. After all, he had the paper in his hands and spoke with the kind of confidence that makes you doubt your own sense. The rest of us were shrugging into our packs, lacing boots, more focused on the smell of pine needles and the promise of a night under the stars than on the fine details of orientation. The air that morning was cool, the kind that wakes you up sharper than a cup of coffee. The sun filtered through tall hardwoods, and somewhere far off, a woodpecker hammered out a steady rhythm. I remember adjusting my straps and noticing Carl squinting at the little booklet he'd picked up at the ranger station. "See here," he said, jabbing at the page with a finger. "The trail loops around by the river, then cuts north. Easy walking. We'll hit the overlook by noon." It all sounded reasonable enough. The cover of the pamphlet even had a little sketch of a hiker silhouetted against a canyon view. Exactly the sort of thing that makes you nod and believe. None of us thought to ask why the map had so many restaurant logos printed across the edges, or why the trail lines seemed suspiciously straight. We set off single file, boots crunching on damp soil, conversation light and playful. The forest smelled of moss and last night's rain, and for the first mile, everything looked as expected. Blazes on the trees, a wide enough path, the occasional trickle of water crossing underfoot. Carl strode at the front, pamphlet in hand, like some kind of pioneer. He would stop now and again, make a show of turning the page, then nod decisively and point ahead. None of us knew then, not yet, that Carl wasn't navigating by a trail map at all. He was guiding us with the advertising section, bright little squares promising best burgers in town. And don't miss the Old Mill Ice Cream Parlor. His so-called landmarks weren't bends in rivers or ridge lines. They were billboards in print, meant to lure tourists to diners and gift shops miles away. And by the time we figured it out, well, the day had already begun to turn strange. It started small, the kind of thing you brush off when spirits are high, and the day feels young. Around mid-morning, Carl pulled us to a stop at a fork in the path. He tapped the pamphlet with great authority and said, "This is it. Right here we turn east. Should lead us straight to the river bend." I glanced around. One path dipped gently down into thicker woods, dark and damp, while the other climbed toward a ridge, rocks scattered like loose teeth. Neither looked particularly river-like, but Carl spoke with such certainty that we followed him upward. My pack straps dug into my shoulders as the sun rose higher, and sweat began to bead along my brow. The air smelled of warm pine and dry earth now. The morning coolness burned away. After nearly an hour, we reached a clearing with a half-collapsed stone wall. The only water in sight was what we had, sloshing in our bottles. Carl announced with a grin, "This must be the old bridge marked on the map." I leaned over his shoulder and finally noticed the bold lettering across the page. "Visit Riverbend Family Restaurant, famous for pancakes, since 1962. The little blue line he was following wasn't a trail at all. It was a decorative border, printed to catch the eye. I bit my tongue. Nobody wanted to admit the sinking suspicion that our map was nothing more than a glorified menu. Instead, we exchanged quiet looks, packs shifting uneasily. Tom, ever the peacemaker, said, "Well, maybe the trail curves down ahead. Let's keep going a bit." None of us wanted to crush Carl's confidence just yet, but as the hours dragged on, the forest grew less friendly. The trail narrowed, twisting among boulders and brambles. Birds that had been singing in the morning fell strangely silent, replaced by the buzz of insects rising with the heat. By noon, when Carl promised we'd be sitting at an overlook, we were instead knee-deep in thorny brush, trying to spot faded blazes on trees that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. When we stopped for lunch, the mood was tense. We chewed jerky in the thin shade of a scraggly oak, while Carl flipped the pamphlet over and traced lines across ads for motel discounts and souvenir shops. "See?" he said, jabbing at a cartoon fish in a chef's hat. "This stream should be just ahead." I didn't have the heart to point out that the stream was actually an arrow pointing toward Joe's bait and tackle, but I had a creeping feeling that we weren't anywhere near the overlook, the river bend, or even the proper trail anymore, and the forest, dense and unfamiliar, suddenly seemed like it had been waiting for just such a mistake. By the time we admitted we were lost, the day had turned heavy and still. Clouds had gathered without any of us noticing, thick and gray, pressing the light flat against the forest floor. The cheerful crunch of boots on dirt was gone. Instead, we slogged through patches of damp leaves and tangled roots, trying to retrace steps that all looked the same. Tom finally broke the silence. "Carl," he said, his voice slow and measured, "are you absolutely sure that pamphlet is a trail map?" Carl bristled, turning the paper over in his hands. The bold headline, "Welcome to Pine Hollow Recreation Area," seemed to mock him. "Of course," he said, though softer this time. "It has all the landmarks. See this?" He pointed at a colorful square. "The watermill." I leaned closer. The watermill was an advertisement for a themed mini golf course in town. Even Carl's face began to falter as the truth sank in. Maybe they stylized it," he mumbled, folding the pamphlet too quickly. The rest of us exchanged glances. Our water bottles were running low, and the snack bag looked a lot thinner than when we'd set out. More troubling, the blazes on the trees were gone now, replaced by nothing but raw bark and lichen. We weren't on a maintained trail anymore. The forest was wild, unmarked, and utterly quiet except for the occasional creak of trees shifting in the rising wind. "Let's backtrack," Tom suggested, already turning. But every direction behind us looked identical. Gnarled trunks, fern-covered ground, and shadows that stretched longer than seemed natural. We picked a way we thought was correct, only to end up circling back to the same fallen log, its bark peeled clean by years of weather. A low rumble rolled through the sky then, making the leaves shiver overhead. The storm was close. We had no choice but to push forward, hoping to find some recognizable feature before the rain pinned us down. Carl, subdued now, walked behind instead of leading, his eyes on the ground. I could feel his embarrassment heavy in the air, mixing with the nervous edge creeping into the rest of us. The forest seemed to close tighter around us as we pressed on. The air grew thick, full of the sharp smell of ozone and wet soil. Somewhere in the distance, a single crow called, its voice harsh and lonely. My chest tightened with the realization that we weren't just lost. We were at the mercy of whatever lay ahead. And ahead, as if waiting, the trees suddenly broke into a clearing none of us had expected. At its center rose a tall shape, an old fire tower, weather-beaten and leaning slightly, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Relief flickered in us at the sight of something human-made, but the way the tower loomed, creaking in the wind, made it feel less like salvation and more like a warning. We stood at the edge of that clearing, packs sagging, boots caked in mud, staring at the fire tower like it was some relic out of another world. The thing was tall and spindly, wood bleached gray with age, the staircase winding up in broken zigzags. A sheet of tin flapped loosely near the top, clanging each time the wind pushed it. For a moment, nobody said a word. The storm clouds overhead churned darker, and the first drops of rain began to pepper the leaves. Tom was the first to speak. "If we climb it, maybe we can see the trail, or the river, or something." His voice carried hope, but also hesitation. Carl, still smarting from his pamphlet blunder, just shrugged and muttered, "Better than wandering in circles." So we approached, boots squelching in the damp grass. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and that sharp tang of rusted metal. Up close, the tower looked even less stable than from afar. The lowest steps creaked under Tom's weight as he tested them, the wood flexing dangerously. "One at a time," he warned, glancing back. One by one we climbed, each groan of the wood making my stomach tighten. The forest opened wider with each level, trees stretching in every direction, a sea of green growing darker as the storm pressed down. The wind up there cut sharper too, rattling the loose tin until it wailed like some lost animal. By the time I reached the top platform, my hands were slick with both rain and sweat. The view stretched miles, but not in the way we'd hoped. No neat ribbon of river. No comforting glimpse of a trailhead parking lot. Just forest, rolling and endless, broken only by the thin silver line of lightning flashing far off on the horizon. Then Tom pointed east. "Smoke," he said, squinting. Sure enough, a faint gray column rose against the storm-dark sky. Not thick, not close, but enough to spark some fragile relief. Signs of a campfire. Maybe a cabin. Shelter. The rain picked up, spattering across the platform. Carl, who had climbed last, looked pale, but managed a weak smile. "Guess I led us somewhere useful after all." His voice cracked with nerves, but none of us had the heart to tease. We clambered down carefully, thunder rolling closer now. Each step down, trembling beneath our boots. By the time we reached the ground, the rain had turned steady. No more debating. We shouldered our packs and angled toward that smoke, the forest swallowing us once more. But the further we walked, the fainter the smoke seemed, until at last it vanished altogether, swallowed by the storm. And that's when I realized the clearing wasn't just empty. It was silent in a way the forest never should be. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the hiss of rain on leaves and the faint groan of the tower behind us, as if it were watching us go. The rain came down in sheets as we pressed forward, our jackets soaked through, boots squishing with every step. The forest floor turned slick, the smell of wet leaves rising strong enough to sting the nose. For a while, we marched in silence, each of us following the next, eyes on the ground, waiting for that column of smoke to reappear. But it never did. It was as though the storm had swallowed it whole, or worse, that it had never really been there at all. After another mile or two, the ground dipped into a shallow ravine, where a trickle of water ran between mossy stones. We stopped there, huddled under the broad limbs of a maple, trying to decide what to do. Tom's voice trembled with fatigue when he finally said what we were all thinking. We might not find our way out tonight. Carl, who had hardly spoken since the tower, sat down on a rock, his shoulders slumped. He held that crumpled pamphlet like it was a dead weight. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "I thought I was helping." His pride had drained away, leaving only regret. And here's the strange thing. None of us were angry anymore. Tired, wet, nervous, yes, but not angry. Because out there, with night falling fast and thunder splitting the sky, the only thing that mattered was pulling together, so we gathered what dry twigs we could, sheltered by Tom's poncho, and managed to coax a small fire to life. The smoke rose thin and shaky, but it gave us warmth, light, and the steady crackle that kept fear at bay. We didn't find the trail again until morning. The storm had cleared, leaving a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. As the forest steamed in the sunlight, we followed the ravine downstream, and by sheer luck, stumbled onto a real blaze-marked path. When we finally reached the trailhead, the ranger chuckled at our story and held up a fresh copy of the same pamphlet Carl had carried. "That thing," he said, "it's just for tourists. Half the maps in it are just doodles pointing to diners and ice cream shops." We laughed then, though it was the kind of laugh that comes only after you're safe, when you can finally let the tension out of your bones. Even Carl managed to grin, though we never let him near a map again. And looking back, I think that trip taught us more than 100 uneventful hikes ever could. Sometimes it's not about the trail you meant to take. It's about how you handle the wrong turn, and whether you've got folks by your side willing to keep the fire burning when the night closes in.